So we will start the webinar since participants are still joining in, and most of the panelists have also joined in for this webinar today. As we share different time zones, I will say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining this learning webinar today on inclusive data and social protection systems for persons with psychosocial disabilities. Before we start with any proceedings of this webinar today, I will first invite my colleague, Fiza, to share the accessibility features of the webinar. Over to you, Fiza.
Thank you, Vakar. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Fiza. I'm a programs coordinator at TCI Global, and thank you so much for joining us today. Before we officially kick off the session, I would like to share a few guidelines for this webinar. Firstly, I would like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded. The purpose of recording is to make it available to those who registered but couldn't attend due to different time zones. For the speakers, we would kindly request you to keep your microphones and videos turned off when you're not speaking. You may activate your videos and microphones when you're invited to speak on the panel. Moreover, you're also requested to speak at a normal pace so that the interpreters and the captioner can meet the flow of the presentations and statements. I will request the interpreters and captioner to flag us to slow down in case we are moving fast. For the participants, we are providing international sign interpretation and closed captions for these sessions. To have access to the closed captions, please click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. During the event, if you have any questions for the speakers, you can submit them using the Q&A option, which is also located at the bottom of your screen. The speakers will address your questions directly or by the end of the sessions, given if we have time. Thank you so much for your cooperation and over to you, Vakar. That's all.
Thank you, Fiza. I will now introduce myself. My name is Vakar Puri. I identify myself as a person with psychosocial disability. I'm located in Pakistan and I'm working with Transforming Communities for Inclusion, TCI, as the Director of Operations and Programs. And on behalf of the movement, we extend our very, very warm thank you to all the participants who have joined us today for this webinar. Thank you so much for your immense support. To give a background and some introduction of TCI, I would share that TCI is a post-CRPD movement and an organization of persons with psychosocial disabilities. It is empowered by the extraordinary vision and guidance provided by the UN Convention. We are a membership-based organization and we have our membership representation in Asia Pacific, Africa, Europe, and Americas region. Over the years, we have been working very actively for strengthening and empowering national organizations of persons with psychosocial disabilities to lead advocacy initiatives at the national level, regional levels, and as well as on the global levels. As a movement, we also engage in dialogues with a variety of stakeholders, including the civil society organizations, development agencies, UN agencies, and governments for the realization of the Article 19 and our right to live independently in the communities. In TCI, we place ourselves in the center of the cross disability movements as a way to reclaim our identity, dignity, and autonomy. And in TCI Works, our closest allies have been our cross disability stakeholders and organizations, and several other civil society organizations as well. So we thank you for your support. And at this point, I also want to take the opportunity to remember our leaders, past and present. We remember our founding director, Dr. Bhargavi Dawar, who founded this movement in 2013 with support from our peers in Asian countries and guided the vision of TCI for full and effective participation and community inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities. I also want to thank and welcome all our distinguished partners and speakers who have joined us today for this webinar and have taken out time for sharing learnings from their years of work. For example, what an inclusive social protection system looks like, challenges and barriers persons with psychosocial disabilities still continue to face while accessing social protection schemes, and how together we can push for more inclusive and robust social protection system in countries for persons with psychosocial disabilities. Because even after 20 years of the CRPD, persons with psychosocial disabilities remain excluded. And today's discussion comes at a very critical time when persons with psychosocial disabilities still remain among the most underrepresented and marginalized groups in global and national data systems. Across much of the global south, we continue to see how data policies, and social protection frameworks are not designed to recognize our realities. We are still too often labeled as persons with unsound minds, mentally ill, or patients, rather than persons with disabilities, with equal rights to live, work, and be included in the communities. Disability assessments in many countries continue to rely on medicalized, outdated frameworks that deny our existence as a disability group. Several data tools, which are widely used in census and surveys, often fail to capture the lived experiences of persons with psychosocial disabilities. And as a result, we are not counted. We are left out from budgets, from national action plans, and legislative frameworks. Access to disability identity cards or certification in many countries is still controlled by medical professionals or psychiatrists. And this gatekeeping denies many people their rightful access to social protection benefits. And even where benefits are existing, they often reduce our needs to the narrow framing of mental health, focusing only on treatment and medication rather than recognizing our broader social, economic, and community support needs. Social protection, in its truest sense, is about guaranteeing dignity and equality across the life cycle, ensuring that persons with disabilities have income security, healthcare, and access to supports that enable independent living and community participation. Without access to income, housing support, or community supports, people are pushed into cycles of exclusion, institutionalization, and homelessness. And through our collective discussion today, we will explore how rights based reforms, inclusive data tools, cross disability partnerships, and community supports can transform social protection systems globally that is inclusive and accessible to all persons with disabilities. With this, we will move to our first speaker. I will invite Mr. Daniel Mond from Center for Inclusive Policy to take the floor and set the stage for today's webinar and talk about what constitutes a truly and inclusive social protection system, which is inclusive and accessible for all persons with disabilities. Daniel is the CEO and co-founder of the Center for Inclusive Policy and has been working in the sector for many years on disability data and inclusive policies for persons with disabilities, and has also worked with the Washington Group and UNICEF for developing the Washington Group questions and child functioning module. Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us in the panel today. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be with you talking about this, a very important topic. My talk here, what I'm going to concentrate on is giving an overview of what we mean by inclusive social protection in general. So if we can start my slides, that would be great. So there are three, go to the next slide, please. There are three basic functions of social protection in general. The first is poverty alleviation, right? For people who don't have sufficient resources to meet some established minimum level of basic necessities. It's just food, shelter, and things like that. The second is income security, to establish a minimum level of income for people who are deemed unlikely to be able to work because of age or disability or illness, or maybe they're lost their jobs. And so this includes things like old age pensions, or what people often think of as the purpose of disability benefits, to have that assurity that there's going to be this sort of constant level of income security. And finally, it's to protection against shocks. Maybe there's a natural disaster, maybe there's a factory plant that shuts down for economic reasons. And so there's this temporary loss of income, and the social protection system is seen as providing a safety net for that transition period of time until people can get back on their feet. Next slide. And there are several ways that social protection systems miss the mark, that they're not inclusive, because those objectives don't take into account the lived reality of people with disabilities. For example, for poverty alleviation, those systems do not account for the extra costs incurred by people with disabilities. People with disabilities have the same costs as people without disabilities: food, shelter, clothing, etc. But they often have additional costs, whether that is disability-specific things like assistive technology or personal assistance, or it's just higher costs in things like transportation or medical care that are related to their disability. And because these things aren't taken into account, people with disabilities who have the same level of income as somebody without disabilities are actually living at a lower standard of living. And that second, income security. Quite often, disability benefits are related to a perceived ability to work. In many programs, disability is defined as the inability to work because of some impairment. And that undercuts income security because it creates this work disincentive that prevents people from disabilities from establishing their own livelihood generation. When it comes to protection against shocks, where social protection benefits often fall short, is not realizing that the shock of, say, an onset of a disability creates a new reality for the person. It's not like, oh, the factory shut down, I'm going to be unemployed for a month, or oh, there was a flood and now I can't generate income for a limited amount of time, and then I'm going back to the way things were before. No, I'm living in a different reality with different needs. So a temporary benefit like that doesn't help me adjust to my new situation. Next slide. And when we think about the various costs that people with disabilities incur that social protection systems might need to address, we have to think of two very different kinds of costs: indirect and direct. Indirect costs affect the size of the pie. So there's a picture on the screen right now. No disability, there's a blue circle. Oh, that's how much income people have. And the income that people with disabilities have might be less, the orange circle, because of barriers to education, because of barriers to employment. They're unable to have as much income. And that's different than the direct costs of disability, which are the actual expenditures you have to make out of pocket, maybe to buy rehabilitation services for example. And so people without disabilities have certain things they have to buy, like again, food, shelter, but people with disabilities have those things and they have additional costs. And by having to pay for those necessities, it cuts into their ability to pay for the other necessities. And social protection programs sometimes will have to have a different structure in order to meet these two different kinds of costs that people with disabilities incur. Next slide. And then when we look at these extra costs, when we do studies, we see they vary tremendously by type of disability and by level of support needs. So there's a graph right now that's being shown, and there's a bar for each sort of type and degree of disability. This comes from the country of Georgia. And the bars are very different heights, showing that depending on the type and degree of disability that you have, your extra costs are very different. And those bars are divided into different colors. I don't have time to go into the details, but each of those colors represents a different type of spending, say personal assistance or medical care or transportation. And by type of disability, you also have very different types of things that people need. People with psychosocial disabilities have different types of extra costs than people, say, with a physical disability. So a social protection program has to be able to address all of those things. Next slide. And so to sum up, the core principles of inclusive social protection, we have to move away from incapacity to work. Social protection benefits should not be seen as, oh, for those people who can't work. Benefits should support participation. They shouldn't be seen just as anti-poverty, but they need to be covering those extra costs of disability that people face. A one-size-fits-all program can't work because we have to account for the very different situations of people with different types of disability and level of support needs. And of course, we have to move away from institutions to support people living in the community, which we can do by addressing those other core principles that I just mentioned. And I'm very excited today to hear all the presentations about people who are working in this area to make social protection truly inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for your presentation and sharing with us what do we mean when we say social protection for people with disabilities, and how persons with disabilities standard of living is affected depending on the type of disabilities as well as the types of needs people with disabilities have. Thank you also for sharing with us the core principles of an inclusive social protection system, which promotes community living of persons with disabilities and it ensures equal participation of all persons with disabilities. Also, the point you made, how important it is to move away from the incapacity to work approaches, which we face very commonly in our movements of persons with psychosocial disabilities and intellectual disabilities. And we urge that all incapacity laws and frameworks should be dismantled and taken off. As they take away our personhood, they leave us as non-persons who are excluded and are left behind in all aspects of the lifespans. So thank you so much, Daniel, once again, and we will come back to you during the end of the webinar. Um, so we will now move to a panel discussion where we will talk about several barriers and challenges we as persons with psychosocial disabilities face in our communities and how they restrict our access to social protection schemes. I will invite Ms. Rubina Alamboya. Rubina founded Triumph Uganda, a mental health support group, using her life experiences, stories to build hope and resilience, mitigating the stigma attached to psychosocial disability, and is leading an advocacy and is leading advocacy in Uganda for community inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities. She's also the president of Transforming Communities for Inclusion and also serves on the board of the African Disability Forum. In this panel, we also invite Daniel Iga to join the panel. Daniel serves on the board of the International Disability Alliance and is the co-chair of the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry. He's also a co-founder of the Pan-African Network of Persons with Psychosocial Disabilities and is the General Secretary of Mental Health Uganda. It is a pleasure to have you both with us. Thank you so much for supporting the webinar today. I will first give the floor to Rubina. Rubina, your work has powerfully highlighted how issues around our identity and institutionalization intersect, especially for women with psychosocial disabilities. And we are still recognized solely as patient groups in our communities. We are left out to institutions and segregated from mainstream communities. As a woman with psychosocial disability and from your local context, how institutionalization and social stigma impact women's access to social protection schemes and what changes are needed to ensure their inclusion in communities. Over to you, Rubina.
Thank you so much, Waka. I begin by appreciating the sovereignty of God for the gift of life and the gift of us all to one another as we are here today. I also want to say that I really bring warm greetings and salutations from women with psychosocial disabilities whose voice I'm representing here all around the globe. And since I'm from Africa, I carry a basket of greens and fresh fruits from Africa. I hope they are well received, especially from Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. Yes, Waka has already said about me. I remain Robina Nakanwa Jalambuya, serving as president of TCI. And of recent, I also took on to be on the executive council, to be an executive council member of Disabled Women in Africa, which is affiliated to the Africa Disability Forum and the International Disability Alliance. I also serve as the advisory board member for Validity Foundation. And as you've heard local, I'm here at Triumph Mental Health Support. Now as we are here together, gathered from different corners for this inclusive data and social protection discussions and strategies to leave no one behind, it is at this time that I request that I'm allowed to bring us now to the realities among us as women with psychosocial disabilities. First, who are we and why do we exist? Identity and purpose. There is no dignity, no community inclusion, no sustainable development if our identity is not appreciated and embraced with a humane open heart and mind. And this is, for us here in Africa, we call it Ubuntu spirit. We are human beings created with dignity, beauty, strength, and the resilience to live on this earth together with others. We also belong. We are gifted and talented with creativity, innovativeness, that is built within us to live productive lives, add value by enriching our communities as we make meaningful contributions to society. Our identity as persons, and in this case, women with psychosocial disabilities, as I won't go much in it because Waka brought it out very well. It is deprived from the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
I think it's technology has given us so many good things, but not like some, we also have like some challenges with that. And I think there is some internet issue at Rubina's end. Fiza, do we still have Rubina with us in the panelist?
Hello.
Yes, we do.
Yes. Okay. Got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was an internet cut. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Rubina. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry about that. I was saying that women with sexual disabilities are a diverse population. We are together with those identified under mental disabilities. So we carry the same stigma and discrimination around that. So this conversation is timely for us as there are global efforts towards inclusion growing. There remains a clear need to better understand our identity with a gender lens and intersectionality between disability and gender. The diversity among us and our diverse support needs and the complex challenges that we face. As a woman with psychosocial disability across all ages, we face intersectional discrimination, multiple forms of marginalization based on our gender, disability, socioeconomic status, and other factors, not forgetting age, underrepresentation in decision-making processes at all levels. So most of our voices are always missing, and the voice of a woman with psychosocial disability. We have high support needs due to intersecting identities. So there are diverse challenges, but then the support services for our well-being are very inadequate. They are not accessible, and many times they are missing in most communities, especially the rural communities. So reasonable accommodations, the affirmative actions are all far reality for us as women with psychosocial disabilities. Social protection is crucial, as it has already been said, to reduce vulnerability and support inclusion of us women with disabilities across our life cycle. And they can also, social protection can also provide income security, covering our health care, as it has already been said. Also disability-related costs, including support services. But this is far from me and my fellow women with psychosocial disabilities. When we talk about inclusive data, it cannot reflect if it is not reflecting our existence, then we remain invisible. Our individual identity in all our diversities, if it is not respected, recognized, and our worth in the community is not acknowledged, then our lived reality of denial of legal capacity that will be talked about, and decision-making of women with psychosocial disability, also those of intellectual disability globally, as evidenced in the recent research that is going to be launched soon, that we got involved in as a local organization, that was done by Women Enabled International and TCI Global, plus other partners. They evidenced and we observed that all these complex challenges hit most at those who are most marginalized, like women with psychosocial disabilities, especially those in remote rural areas in the global south. So now, as a survivor of physical institutions, as a young mother and a woman from the rural communities, I also want to bring this and testify that all these injustices we are talking about has led to institutionalization of all forms towards women and girls with psychosocial disabilities at all levels of society. The different forms of institutionalization, even of our minds, has led to further marginalization, abuse of our human rights violations, human rights violations, underdevelopment, and the pain of being left behind. Loss of our dignity, even worse, the loss of lives that we register and we hear about. What do we need? Me and you who are listening in need to join in creating strategies that can work for social change. What we need as women with psychosocial disabilities around the globe is to live in communities of our choice. This calls for community support systems and support services. We also need to strengthen everyone who can play that role, to strengthen and implement the policies and laws that clearly support the rights of girls and women with psychosocial disabilities, dignity, while following the national, regional, and international standards. Also, it's important to appreciate best practices and use them in collaborations, networks, partnerships. And I would like to say, let us all invest in lives of those that are more at risk. Let us embrace the Ubuntu spirit that we talk about always, like here in Africa. It's also best practice to embrace the Ubuntu spirit so that justice will be for all of us as human beings enjoying opportunity to live on earth together in peace, joy, and love. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Rubina. Thank you so much for highlighting the and talking about the identity and the importance of identity, why we adopt on the identity of persons with disabilities and not as people with mental illnesses or having mental health conditions. We advocate for this because it ties down to disability frameworks and opens range of human rights, like all human rights, on an equal basis to others as people with psychosocial disabilities, and we have the right to access those fundamental human rights on an equal basis to others. And also, thank you for highlighting how women with psychosocial disabilities are double discriminated when they are institutionalized, when they are segregated, and when they are most marginalized within the families, and when it is identified, okay, if a woman with psychosocial disability is in a family. So thank you so much for sharing experiences from your local context. Daniel, turning to you, your advocacy has been central to highlighting how legal systems can either enable or exclude persons with psychosocial disabilities. Could you speak about how denial of legal capacity acts as a barrier to accessing social protection, and how we can ensure that persons with psychosocial disabilities are active decision makers, not passive recipients in the social protection programs? Over to you, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you very much. Our moderator, Waka, um, all the panelists in your respective capacities, and all those who have taken off time to log in and listen to this very important conversation. Warm greetings from the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry. And here I give tribute to my colleague who rested, Dr. Bhagavidava, the founder of TCI Global, who was once a board member on the World Network. And so I'm also now the acting co-chair of the World Network and a board member of the International Disability Alliance, as already said, but I'm based in Uganda. And I also lead My Story Initiative, which is a peer support organization. That is a preamble of what I am, but I want actually to thank my appreciation to TCI Global and all partners for this good spirit of togetherness so that we can bring the needed change. You know, once we have a united voice, then we can impact change. And I thank God that we are alive to connect. And as a senior citizen, I'm speaking from a wealth of experience because I'm about to celebrate 50 years of positive living with psychosocial disability. Therefore, that one brings me to where the question is. And as persons with psychosocial disabilities are highly marginalized, as we all know, and face several key barriers to accessing social protection schemes, including lack of awareness and understanding. That is limited knowledge about psychosocial disability and available support services which hinder access to the social protection due to myths and misconceptions. Also, social stigma and discrimination due to negative attitudes, stereotypes. And then policy, now that's this where the gist of the matter is, where we are looking at legal frameworks, policy and legislative barriers, restrictive laws and policies. These laws and policies may be designed without considering the needs of people with psychosocial disabilities, further exacerbating their exclusion from social protection schemes. And point in focus. In Uganda, we have had legal frameworks which were using derogatory language, referring to us as criminal lunatics, imbeciles, idiots, and people of unsound mind. These are all derogatory and they debase a person. And therefore, not only debasing, but once you are labeled a person of unsound mind, then they have killed your legal capacity. That is a legal death. Denial of legal capacity and participation in decision-making process. Many countries still have laws that deny people with psychosocial disabilities the right to make decisions about their own lives, including financial, healthcare decisions. This can lead to forced institutionalization, forced treatment, and other human rights abuses. However, all is not lost. We live in an era of the United Nations Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, of which I negotiated from the 3rd ad hoc to the 8th ad hoc committee. And we fought tooth and nail on Article 12 about full legal capacity, equality before the law. So, lack of accessible information and friendly communication includes persons with psychosocial disabilities. And of course, our members may not have access to information that there are things we have changed. Like in Uganda, I had to make a public litigation against that derogatory language. And today, at least, we have stripped off that in our constitution. And lack of representations, persons with psychosocial disabilities are often excluded from decision-making processes that affect their lives, including policy development and implementation of social protection schemes. What does this mean? We have a logo ever since we began negotiating the UNCRPD until completion. Nothing for us without us. And therefore, what are we saying? That we are human beings, and even if somewhere we need support like any other person, we need supported decision making vis-a-vis guardianship, which is substituted decision making. But many times, many things are done behind our backs, and they say in the best interest. But that word, the best interest, is the best interest of those who are formulating these legal frameworks, and not the best interest of users and survivors. And therefore, this leads to discrimination, even legally. Inadequate support systems, social protection schemes often fail to provide adequate support for people with psychosocial disabilities, including access to mental health services, social care, and economic support, and insufficient community-based support services. Lack of peer support and inadequate accommodations hinder this social inclusion. And therefore, since we are seeing all this and everything I go back why the convention was made. We had MI principles, but they were not legally binding. So you could not take anybody to court. But now that we have the CRPD and countries have signed and ratified, then we are liable to take public litigations to ensure that our rights are not violated and our dignity is preserved. And in this aspect, as we go on, inaccessibility to infrastructure and services, there could be physical barriers such as lack of ramps, but that one, yes, we have people with both physical and psychosocial disabilities. So they may have that. And that could be to buildings and programmatic barriers like insufficient time for medical exams, limited access, and especially for those with multiple disabilities. So as we continue, there's low socio-economic status, limited financial resources, and lack of economic empowerment opportunities exacerbate poverty, and hence you violate even the sustainable development goals like number 1 about eradicating poverty. And we know very well that court systems include our land friends, the lawyers, who will need, if we are there to support us, they will need their fees. And if we are left in abject poverty, then we cannot access that legal representation on equal basis with others because we may not be able to afford. And in case of violence and abuse, persons with psychosocial disabilities are always at high risk of violence, exploitation, and abuse, which further restricts their access to social protection. And
Daniel,
hello?
can we request, yeah, Daniel, can we request you to wrap up as we are out of
Yes?
time? Yeah.
Okay. And thank you very much. Lack of inclusive disaggregated data that has already been talked to, because without data, then there is no planning. And as I wrap up, I call upon all people, all nations, whereby those who have signed and ratified the convention to ensure that the domestication process takes place, that the laws are made on international standards and they are all inclusive. And to fellow users and survivors, this is an area where if the rights are not observed, then you take on to public litigation, because many countries are hiding under progressive realization. Thank you so very much. There's a lot we would share, but time is limited. And let me allow other panelists to begin from there the conversation. I remain Dr. Daniel Iga Mwesigwa, and also thanking you so very much to amplify this voice of social protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel, for highlighting in specific like several issues which hinder participation of persons with psychosocial disabilities to access and participate in social protection programs. And specifically, you talked about effective implementation of the Article 12, and I will also say Article 28 of the Convention, and also in dismantling the legal incapacity frameworks. And I also want to highlight, because we were talking about institutions and also dismantling of such legal incapacity frameworks, that the deinstitutionalization guidelines also in its many section, it talks about the removal of such frameworks. and on an immediate basis to ensure the independent living of people with disabilities. And also another important point about access to information, which play a very key role in ensuring access to social protection schemes. We recently experienced this during the COVID times when there was so much lack of legitimate information that how people with disabilities can have access to cash transfers or in-kind supports which the government was providing at that time. So thank you so much for your contributions. And at this point, I also want to once again encourage all the participants to please feel free to drop in questions for the panelists in the Q&A section below. And I will also request the panelists to respond to them in case if we don't have time at the end of the webinar to respond by speaking, so that if all of the questions could be addressed under the Q&A section. So as we know that the disability assessments and data frameworks shape access to social protection, and that the disability related cost should further the outcome of inclusion based on the disability disaggregated data. We will now hear from Sanjay from Koshish. Sanjay is a dedicated disability rights advocate with over 15 years of experience advancing psychosocial disability inclusion in Nepal. He is a key figure within Nepal's disability movement and holds a leadership role at Koshish, which is which is the national OPD of persons with psychosocial disability. And he also represents at the Cross Disability Organization in Nepal through NFTN. Sanjay, based on your work in Nepal, what are some of the disability related extra costs for persons with psychosocial disabilities? And where we are with that in providing those to persons with psychosocial disabilities? And also, could you highlight how we can ensure inclusive data collection and assessments of persons with psychosocial disabilities? Over to you, Sanjay.
Could I share my screen? I have not shared.
Yes, I think Bhagya will do that. Bhagya will share your slides. Okay, here it is.
Thank you, Wakar, and namaste everyone from Nepal. I'm sharing today about the disability assessment and disability extra cost, how practicing in Nepal. Thank you for the opportunity to share Nepal's experience. In Nepal, disability assessment is the gateway to right and benefit. We have a Progressive Disability Right Act 2017, influenced by CRPD. On paper, it promises a shift from charity model to right-based model. But in practice, we are still in transition. For people with psychosocial disability, cognitive disability, this gap is not abstract, it's something they face daily. The core problem is the assessment model itself. Legally, we talk about right and inclusion, but in reality, assessment are strictly medical. Eligible is decided by medical board, focused on diagnosis, impairment, not on understanding, barriers on participation. This led to three main consequences. Misclassification of denial, clinical checklist don't reflect lived realities. So many with psychosocial disabilities are misclassified or excluded altogether. Invisibility in data, if tools don't count you, you disappear from statistic, policy, and budget. Reinforced stigma. People are forced to perform brokenness to prove their eligibility rather than being treated with dignity and support. The way forward are three-pronged strategy: fix the tools, change the process, and bridge the gap. Fix the tools. We need to adapt and validate tools like the Washington group said to properly include psychosocial or cognitive dimensions. Current tools can tell us who is being left behind, but not why or what is the cost. For example, for someone with psychosocial disability, a tool might record difficulty concentrating, but it comply misses the cost of therapy, workplace discrimination, or the need to provide transport because public buses triggers anxiety. We need tools that measures barriers and extra cost, not just functional limitation, and they must be accessible across ages and literacy level. Change the process. We must move from clinic-based diagnosis to right-based assessment that look at barriers in communities, workplace, and justice system. This means community-based screening and peer support model that reduce stigma and address the shortage of specialities. Bridge the implementation gap. Even when people get a disability ID card, many receive no support. Structural problem, few specialists, inconsistent rules, limited service, leave majority unregistered and unsupported. We need to move from issuing static cards to provide dynamic support that reflect really economic and social realities. Disability extra cost. Disability-related extra cost. Globally, we talk about inclusion, but unless we identify and measures the extra cost people face right to remain on paper. In Nepal, these costs are invisible. The system certifies someone to permanently disabled but ignores the real cost of participation. For example, Nepal provides a universal allowance, but it is not need-based. A single benefit rules force people to pick one identity, Dalit, senior, or disabled, even when exclusion overlaps. In mountain district, a person with a mobility impairment might have to hire a porter just to collect their allowance. The cost of reaching the benefit can exceed the benefit itself. Stigma works like a tax. People hide their disability at work to avoid discrimination. Travel discount and free medicine exist on paper, but inaccessible transport and limited drugs list mean the cost fall on individual. To change this, we must systematically measures direct health care cost not covered by the state, transport cost due to the exclusion, opportunity cost from the discrimination, social cost of isolation. In conclusion, a static medical model will always fail to address the dynamic reality of the disability. Nepal experience shows the need to move from medical diagnosis to barrier focus assessment, from static card to dynamic support, and from charity to economic justice. Our call is for global methodological solidarity to develop tools that make extra cost visible to global South context. If we do this together, we can build systems that truly see the whole person, not just the diagnosis. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you for your valuable inputs and highlighting that the data collection tools, such as the Washington Group or other tools which are being used for household surveys, for population census, are not are currently they are constituted on medical diagnosis, and they should not and are not based on the participation or barriers faced by people with disabilities. And as you suggested that this should be addressed so that we can identify the needs of people with psychosocial disabilities, so that we can include them in development programs, we can include them in accessing the mainstream services and not exclude them from the available services. Thank you also for highlighting the issue of disability identity cards. I think it's one of the biggest issues in some of our South Asian countries, and it is still a very huge issue in so many other countries as well. Where the board is constituted of so many medical professions, when you go to access the disability certificate or a disability identity card, or this or the functionality is so complicated that people with disabilities, they say that okay, it's better we don't take this card. So these issues are still there, and thank you also for highlighting these issues. We will now give the floor to Kavita Nair from Bapu Trust. Kavita has been actively involved in community mental health and inclusion programs through her work with Bapu Trust for over 2 decades in Pune, in India. She strongly believes in the potential of indigenous traditional healing methods and community based support systems, and has been advocating for a holistic, community driven approach to psychosocial health that emphasizes sustainable recovery, inclusion, and human connection. Kavita, could you share with us why community support systems and awareness raising are viable entities for promoting an inclusive social protection system? And based on your learnings from your work, can you share some recommendations on what kind of investments and policy shifts are needed to make the community support systems as a formal part of the social protection programs? Over to you, Kavita.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you so much, Vakar. Very heavy questions and perhaps a few answers. Uh, of course, answers also in the form of many presentations which were already done. So yes, I think I'll begin with just a warm greeting to everyone and heartfelt thanks to TCI Global and all partner organizations for this great opportunity. I will make a short presentation of 4 slides. I will go slow. Yeah. Mm. So the first one, yeah, thanks, Fiza. Thanks. The next one, please. I think it is very well established that persons with psychosocial disabilities are invisible within social protection programs. You've heard many speakers speak about this. Now, this exclusion is not only because there is a lack of schemes. In fact, many countries provide a lot of social protection measures. There are cash transfer programs, there are poverty alleviation programs, there are disability specific programs, there are livelihood schemes, there is health insurance. Also, in his presentation, Daniel Mont spoke about many of these different kinds of social protection schemes and programs. As you have heard from presenters before me, the problem is not the absence or lack of schemes only. The problem is that most persons with psychosocial disabilities are not able to either access the schemes or sustain the benefits that these schemes have to offer. Why? There are systemic barriers. There is low awareness that a scheme is available or a program is available, and there are inadequate community support systems which can actually bridge the gap between the schemes and services and the people who need them. Now, a key role for all of us here in this community and communities outside is how do we translate the services, schemes, entitlements, benefits from paper into practice. There are many ways to bridge this gap. And in today's discussion, we will be focusing on two. One is investments in awareness raising, and second is community support. Next one, please. So awareness raising, let's call it the starting point. It is like the ignition switch. You start from here and you move towards community support systems and eventually access to social protection. If you look at investments in awareness programs, much of the investments go into information campaigns, symptom-based identification, or talking about mental health conditions. Now, if transformation has to happen, then investments have to be routed away from this towards awareness, which is in line with Article 8 of the CRPD. For this, awareness programs should engage diverse stakeholders across the ecosystem, not only persons with psychosocial disabilities and their families. You need to engage with the neighborhood, schools, colleges, employers, NGOs, CBOs, government, private sector, everyone. The goal is to help stakeholders, one, understand that psychosocial disability is a rights issue. Two, see persons and not see pathology. Three, recognize that your services are in fact not reaching people who need them. Four, actively work with them so that they are able to address and remove the barriers in their system. So ultimately, the awareness seeks to shift from how can we help or treat this person, or we cannot do anything. Let's call in the experts. So we need to shift, we need awareness to shift from this to who are we leaving behind? How can we support the person? How can we include the person? What can we do to reach you? These are the questions which should enable the shift in thinking and practice among stakeholders to set the inclusion vehicle in motion. Now, again, as a community here and communities outside, we have a key role in one, asking these questions, and two, together arriving at responsive and rights-based actions. Let's look at some examples of what are they. Next one, please. So awareness alone, of course, is not enough. People need simply knowing that a scheme is available is not enough. People need some kind of support systems close to their homes, which will actually enable them to access those schemes, to sustain those schemes and to sustain those benefits, also to contribute to the development of those schemes. Community leaders, self-advocates, persons with lived experiences, a variety of support people are critical local community enablers in this process. Without community support systems, even the best services will remain out of reach. Now, support systems are a network of people which can connect the individual on one side with services or service providers on the other side. You may know of many examples: peer support, befriending, support groups. How can they contribute in bridging this gap? One is they can help to identify people who are excluded or isolated. They can help to identify the invisible people. Two, they can enable access. How? Some examples: they can accompany people to apply for social protection. They can assist with paperwork, navigating bureaucratic procedures, negotiating with officials, seeking reasonable accommodations, and finding creative solutions where some standard requirements are not met. For example, somebody has stayed in a mental hospital for many, many years. They will not have a formal address proof. Now, the person, supported by the community enablers, can work with the service provider in a way that the service provider addresses this problem rather than pushing the responsibility back on the person. So, the community support system, in fact, you can think of it as a soft infrastructure which makes the formal protection mechanisms work in real life. Community enablers have a crucial role here in shaping attitudes and guiding actions of stakeholders. The more community enablers partner with stakeholders, the more stakeholders become aware, the more they would be interested in asking, how can we make sure our service truly reaches you, and what can be changed to make that possible? Next slide, please. So what happens when awareness, community support systems, social protection, and data come together? When awareness, community supports, and social protection programs work together, we are able to see clear and measurable changes. How? Data becomes better. How does data become better? So the community support persons can identify individuals who are otherwise invisible in surveys, census study, or administrative list. For example, a support person can identify, say, some 20 people in their neighborhood who are eligible for disability pension, but who have actually never applied for disability pension. So this is one example of how the data can become better. Second, what this leads to, uptake of services become better. How? Once the identification is done, the community support persons can also help to map the needs of the person and the community, making data and services objective, measurable, and actionable. An example here. So this person who has identified the 20 residents who are eligible for disability pensions, the data reveals that actually lack of address proof is a barrier to accessing the disability pension. So the community enabler, the person supported by the community enablers can actually now take this data, work with the local authorities, and create an alternative registration process or make way for some reasonable accommodations. This leads to better access. How is access better? With awareness and support from local enablers, more and more people can apply, they can stay enrolled, and they can continue to receive the entitlements and benefits. For example, the community leaders can assist the residents to complete the paperwork for disability pensions or a variety of other schemes, social protection schemes. They can help them to successfully access the schemes that they were previously excluded from. When these starts happening for more and more schemes, entitlements, services, socio-economic participation becomes better. With improved access to services, persons with psychosocial disabilities become active contributors to local and national economies, public and private programs. In the same example, the person receives a disability pension, receives employment support, starts a small business, or say joins a skill building program, starts contributing income and participating fully in community and economic life. So each is connected to the other. Eventually, compliance with UNCRPD and SDGs is better when dignity and rights are realized and inclusion becomes applied in practice. And remember, this is all at every step also reflected in data. So, in the above examples, the disability pension programs or livelihood support programs not only ensure but they track participation so that no one is left out of the social protection schemes and benefits. As a result, the fundamental principles of nothing without us and leaving no one behind come to life. So, in a nutshell, awareness informs action, community support acts as the bridge, connecting social protection with those it is meant to serve. Everything I have spoken about in the last few minutes is already happening on the ground while larger advocacy efforts continue to, we continue to work on that, everyday practical measures can already propel the change we want to see. There are many examples from grassroots organizations, community and OPD-led initiatives and programs within the global TCI Global networks, which actually do this. So I will pause now and hand over the floor back to the host. Thank you so much for listening in.
Thank you so much, Kavita, for your uh, always amazing presentation. Thank you for highlighting that there is a need to bridge the gap by formalizing community support systems and awareness systems, and not only to target when we talk about awareness, how broad we have to go and work with the entire stakeholdership within the communities, or which stakeholdership interacts with the communities, and also furthermore how they can remove barriers in the work of persons with psychosocial disabilities, and also how important it is to formalize the community support systems. And once again, I want to reference the DI guidelines, as it also talks about formalizing the community support systems as the support. And it's very common in our constituency that we experience this very regularly in our daily lives, that we depend on support systems for accessing any available services. So thank you so much for your presentation. We will now move to our next speaker. Um, Beatrice, I will move next to you. Beatrice is an independent documentary filmmaker and is an autistic gender disability rights activist. She is the founder of the Autism Inclusiveness Direct Action Group and leads advocacy that spans local, regional, and global spaces, advancing disability rights, inclusive budgeting, and access to justice. Beatrice also holds a government position and serves in the Malaysia's National Council of Persons with Disabilities. Bia, from your experiences, we'd like you to shed light on the importance of cross-sectoral partnerships and how and from your experience, how we can collaborate or promote collaboration between OPDs of persons with psychosocial disabilities, governments, and cross-disability stakeholders to lead towards more inclusive social protection programs, and also like how we can contribute to what all other speakers have been sharing in their past presentations, how we can do this through developing partnerships between organizations and stakeholders. Over to you, Beatrice.
Hi, thanks. Where I'm trying to figure out where I'm looking. Okay, hi guys. I'm Beatrice. I'm based in Malaysia. Um, I just wanted to start by grounding this conversation in where I come from and how I started in advocacy. So I started being really like many of us in this room today. Like we didn't start from advocacy by navigating the conference halls or government meetings rooms. So a lot of us here are people with lived experience, and we start from the very grassroots level, because either responding to a crisis or responding to a gap in between what a formal institution or the government is providing is not reaching us down on the grassroots. And in simply saying that, it also means that I've moved through various different spaces in throughout my whole career, either as an activist or even as a media person. And I think that it's really important to understand the many different roles that I play, so that I could actually present a case study on how this is being practiced in closing the gap in promoting that partnership. So I'm a filmmaker, and I have a lifetime of mental health challenges, psychiatric misdiagnosis, mistreatments, and I was once institutionalized for a very long time. And well, I think that's objective. Could we go back to the previous slide, Bagya? Can we go back to the previous slide page? But never mind. So and then I only got my autism diagnosis a lot later in life, and that really started in realizing that a lot of what had happened to me then was rights being taken away. And then I started a lot of disability advocacy, simply by starting by writing a letter. And only after that had then my advocacy changed, because I took hold of what I could change within the media, of the narratives that are being told by the person themselves. Like way before this started, in Malaysia, at least in the landscape, there was hardly anything that was actually written by an autistic person, or anything about us that was written by us, or even in terms of participatory. So there is a very strong hold that we are usually spoken for. And on top of that, there is this huge gap in Malaysia, because we're a we're multi-ethnicity, and the diversity of language in this country. So it means that navigating that becomes a lot harder, because there are dominance over certain languages in advocacy, certain dominance over language and narratives. It took a while before I then put together and recognizing across the skills that I started to be, and then I founded AIDA to fix that, because I realized that the gap is because the laws and the legislative in Malaysia are actually not in favor of people with disability. And what more people with psychosocial disabilities, neurodivergence, especially those who are not often. And I'll explore some of this a little bit more. And AIDA had then became the only autistic led organization or collective of sort. We are changing form at the moment. A collective of sort that is on every ministry right now today, that become the autism voice that they would call on, because of an active participation in a lot of the government policy conversation. And it took a while for them to then finally, not finally, I think it took a while. And I think also because of the large media presence that I've had in pushing through this, I was then appointed into the National Council of Disability after informally working with a lot of ministers, which I had different government ministries and agencies, and a few different representatives in the last 5 years. So now, from moving from working with them informally to become a formal voice within the government system. So in saying that, my role hasn't changed, but I have diversified in the roles of how do I bridge myself as a person who has knowledge in how to navigate media, as a person who still very much is a grassroots activist, and I also then work within now the state system with direct sightings of documentations, drafting of laws, national action plans. And I thought that if we go to the next page, and I thought that I wanted to use this case study to strongly demonstrate how bridging this across the different roles that we play to really promote um, a cohesiveness, as well as to promote how are we amplifying grassroots to inform of policy, and at the same time to also bridge policy back down to how it could translate into grassroots movement. So Malaysia recently had a tragic case in the last 2 years, in the last 2 days actually, where there was a murder in school by a 14-year-old boy who fatally stabbed a 16-year-old girl on school grounds. And this had became such a huge uproar on top of the many different things that are happening in school safety at the moment in Malaysia. But this was extremely amplified to me because this boy, this boy's details was then being spread and was being spread on across multiple different digital platforms, social media, where his psychiatric history details, including where he was seeking counseling treatment. And of course, it starts to conflate that because he was violent and he was a murderer because of his mental illness. So this caused a lot of uproar. And immediately when I looked at that, it really it really hit me because I am that boy. I am often the person that's being thought as she's very, very violent, or she has a tendency to be aggressive and an aggression, because that was what landed me into the psychiatric ward in the first place. And on top and because of how I'm also very connected to a lot of grassroots groups. So a lot of people were also calling me because they were also worried about what was being said online could then exclude their children from school. And I had autistic teens who were also calling me and say that, like, I actually know this boy, or I actually could relate to the boy, and what would people think of me? Can I still go to school? So immediately what I did was I gathered together a group of people with full support to actually produce a grassroots open letter. And in doing so, it's actually not to change the media narrative. People often think that the power of a community voice and a community leader, that I do assume that role, is actually to create this voice in media narrative, but it's more than that. When I start to create an open letter, what I'm actually signaling back to my community and the community of persons with disability is to unite all of our concerns into one document that we could share around. And the power of it is actually getting people to read one statement to assuage a lot of crisis, to assuage a lot of anxiety that something's being done. We are seeing each other. And across the cross disability people, because very quickly, this open letter that we started only went out for a couple of hours to be signed on, and we managed to garner 270 over signatories across clinician, government officials, different organizations, women's rights group. It also went to multiple different persons with disability who courageously put down their disability. And it gave me an analysis, because I do analyze who signed my open letter, and to look at where are these people coming from, what are they relating to, and also people who are allies, people that then who are able to relate that, okay, this is the voice of the community. And at the same time, because all of this is unfolding through a crisis that's actually happening on media, because information of this boy was going, people were starting to call their homes, there were a lot of privacy issues ongoing. Because of the role that I now have, and also the relationships that I've always had with state governments and also different agencies, I was also able to quietly on the back to be able to reach out and craft several narratives to be put out by members of parliament, because parliament is sitting at the moment in Malaysia. So that role then had shifted, and as a member council, I was able to call on the current secretariat at the moment to convene a couple of private meetings so that we can actually intervene, the quiet intervention at the back, to call on the power of having a state seal to say that, can you please remove and intervene manually the algorithm that's strongly causing a lot of harm, and the privacy of all these children that are being exposed online, and also to call on as well the journalist ethics that are happening, where people were directly approaching children to get direct quotes with them without consent. And then and especially also to really stop that narrative that you could only do so by having the country put an IP and a geo block behind it. And this is informed, and I was only able to do this because I'm holding on to an open letter signed by so many different people to actually really represent a voice of, this is not a mental illness problem. This is not just one community's problem. This is an entire nation who came together to sign on, and I have my data. So it become a form of plot. It become a form of focal point for me to bring back into my into my council role to say, you've got to look at this and do this simply. And so I wanted to use this to illustrate this is how the system works, to be able to work within it and to connect across different roles, so that the government would also have a focal point within me as someone who can bring in through, who can also bring across a narrative that we can then have a more united, cohesive messaging in media to stop a harm that's happening to a boy who's experiencing something extremely tragic, regardless of the actions that he did. And this is not to excuse a crime as well. And I also wanted to quickly wrap this up to also end in the next page in saying that this is a work that had been built on, and this learnings of how to connect and make a true line of understanding the bridge that sometimes a lot of us in the long, who's working for the long tail of advocacy will learn, which is to also not just to look at what's possible, but to recognize certain challenges and gaps, because only by seeing what are the limits that we have that we can continue to improve and be more sustainable in the work that we do. These four are four of the biggest things that I found to be something that we all need to learn if we want to be promoting a more cohesive ecosystem, which is actually to understand the emotional label and to navigate between personal pain and the cause of my disability, while also advocating for others in holding space for across disability cohesiveness to happen. And to also recognize unsustainable system, and this is actually the funding. If we look at like the global funding and even in state-funded projects for disability, it's often only on projects. You never fund operations. So in essence, I've been working for free almost for the last 6 years. I'm sustained by philanthropic money, by having another job as a filmmaker, and to do so many, I hardly ever sleep. So to recognize that would also recognize the limitations of the roles that we do as well. And then of course, there's the leadership pressure, because how many of us see ourselves represented and the role that we play to needing to hold a lot of the answers. And this is to also mean that who is then taking of our psychosocial needs,
Please,
support the needs.
can we wrap up? Yeah.
And the last one is obviously, which I think a lot of us in TCI know really well, which is the inequities within our movement itself, how some voices and stories are amplified, while there are a lot of people who are furthest from power and underrepresented. So in this goal, when we start to speak for larger power and larger platform, how do we actually close the power gap as well? So I think my main messages is this, right? Like, it will take a long, I think the road is really long, But I see a lot of hope because I think in navigating across the multiple roles and hats that I play, it also shows that a true line can be found. But that also depends on how are we going to create even accessibility and inclusiveness within our own movement itself. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Beatrice, for your presentation and also sharing that how we can connect the like coming like how important it is that participation of people with psychosocial disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities, autistic movement, how important it is to have representation at all levels in the communities, at the government positions, and how this can drive a systematic change. I'm really sorry that we are running out of time, and it feels really bad to me, like when a speaker is speaking and it's really bad that you stop in the end, to and ask them to wrap up. So really sorry for that, but we have to catch up with the time, so that we also have to think about our support persons who are supporting us. So we'll just request to everyone that kindly wrap up your presentations within 8 to 10 minutes. We'll now move to the next speaker. I want to share that in TCI, we have always believed in the power of movements and that people moving together and not only in silos. And hence, one of our core strategies has been to foster strong collaborations within the cross disability partners and the allied movements. And we also have been focusing a lot on building bridges and solidarity within the movements. And thank you, Beatrice, for setting that context. And with this, I would like now to invite Manel, the Director of Advocacy at Inclusion International. She has been enabling the Inclusions Network to ensure that the voices of people with intellectual disabilities and their families are heard at the national and international levels, and has been building strategic alliances to advance the agenda of inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities in their development. Manel, you bring powerful perspectives from the intellectual disability movement, and we share many common issues, be it legal, environmental, or attitudinal. Can you share with us what are some of the cross movement solidarity strategies you would propose and suggest at the national, regional, and as well as at the global levels for promoting an inclusive social protection system and independent living of people with all disabilities? Over to you, Manel.
Thank you, Vakar. Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to join again one of the webinars that are organized by TCI. As Vakar said, we share a lot of common things between the constituency or the group of persons with intellectual disabilities and people with psychosocial disabilities. From what we heard until now, I will try to be brief and not too repeat, but I think it's important to highlight some of the common challenges from what was already heard and from what we heard at Inclusion International from our network regarding social protection. First, and this will help actually in identifying how or clarifying how we can work together to improve social protection programs. So identification is also a very big issue for us. The Washington group do not identify all persons with intellectual disabilities. Unfortunately, I was pleased to see the comment from Daniel in the chat saying that there is a kind of a revision of the Washington group. So I really hope that this will also include people with intellectual disabilities. In terms of identification ways that are currently existing, is mostly, as you've also mentioned, based on diagnosis, IQ test, and other medical-based assessments, which again are contradictory with the CRPD. And this is important because we know that identification is key for data, and data are essential for designing policy and allocating budget. And this is what allows us to be really recognized and show that we exist. Another challenge is regarding the disability extra costs. So for people, I think one of the issues that both our groups face are regarding the types of support that people with psychosocial disabilities or people with intellectual disabilities may need. They are maybe not as clear to identify as other groups of persons with disabilities, because it's not something that is quantitative, that can be easily recognized. It's not an interpreter or a device or a predetermined number of hours for a personal assistant that we can need daily. The support that we need is more qualitative. It needs to be flexible because it also varies a lot from a person to another. One person might need support for everyday life tasks like cooking, cleaning, washing, while some other person might need support for big decisions or for managing money, or even for decisions related to their health, or to go outside, navigating through transports or employment, etc. So it's very different. It needs to be very flexible because our needs, so the needs of person with intellectual disabilities and person with psychosocial disabilities in terms of support vary a lot and are not clearly defined. And I think this is one of the things that make it harder to design maybe social protection programs that are inclusive. But I would be very keen in hearing from Daniel later on what would be what could be done, because again, we can't make it with a one-size-fits-all program. So what kind of advocacy and work we should do to make sure that this diversity in terms of people, in terms of needs, can be included and part of the social protection programs. Another challenge that was also mentioned is that when exists, the disability allowance is conditioned with work. And this might imply that some people with disabilities may prefer not working in order to not lose the disability allowance, instead of working and having the risk of losing their job. And we know that not being employed, so it's hard to find a job, and when we find it, it's even harder to lose it. And not working makes those people more excluded from the community. Accessing to social protection benefits is also one of the big challenges that we heard from our network when it comes to lack of information, and this was shared by many of the panelists today. And the complexity of the process of getting the social protection benefits when they exist. While in low-income countries, social protection services might be very limited. So it's the few that exist might be very hard to get. And in high-income countries, other challenges also exist because social protection might be spread through so many departments that it is hard to understand the way to get them. And so many people with intellectual disabilities, especially if they don't have the right support, just abandon the process because it's too complex for them. Transport access and costs of transport to access and go through the different departments of social protection is also a big challenge. Legal capacity, of course, is another one that we share, and institutionalization. So what is needed? What can we do together as a disability movement and as organizations of persons with disabilities? So I think it is important to work together, and this kind of webinars is a good way of sharing it. So we need to discuss our common challenges. We need to exchange good practices that exist in some countries, because we know that there are good examples that exist. So it's important to have this continuous discussion and debate and dialogue between the different groups of persons. And then we need to think together, recommended to governments. So we need to explain then the support that people with psychosocial disabilities and people with intellectual disabilities need. Again, because explaining what type of support is needed by everyone is not really easy to understand by governments. Again, it's easier for them to have, okay, you need a wheelchair, or you need this assistive device, or you need an interpreter. That might be easy, an easy thing to understand. But when it comes to flexible support, to human support that is very diverse and that depends on some periods of time, on periods of day, it might be harder to understand. And also to understand the difference between a personal assistant and a support person. So we need to take part in conversations about social protection, and that, unfortunately, I think the past years, we did not have a lot of groups of persons with disabilities involved in conversations about social protection. It's a technical topic, we know it. It's not easy to understand, especially for self-advocates, but it's important to be there, because that way we can start to understand how it works and start to influence, and especially to share what are our needs. Last thing I would say, it is important to think of social protection across the life cycle. The needs change from children to adulthood to other people with disabilities. So when we are in those debates, in these conversations, we need to bring in all people with disabilities, representing all these like different groups within our movements. And within the groups of persons with disabilities, to make sure that the responses given by social protection are really inclusive of all. And for that, again, government should include us and work with OPDs when designing social protection programs as a key thing to ensure inclusive social protection. And I'm conscious of time, so I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Manel. Thank you for your contributions. And you rightly mentioned that it is a technical topic, and that's why these conversations are very important to strengthen the capacities within the movements, and also to explore what are the best possible strategies. Also, I would say that thank you for bringing the point on inclusive budgeting, and as Kavita was also mentioning within her presentation, that how important it is to shift those monetary efforts from building or renovating institutions toward enabling supports and services within the communities, and also that it is a cost effective measure. And I think like we should work together towards promoting community living of people with psychosocial disabilities, as well as how we can promote access to social protection. And as you were mentioning about collaboration, so I would also say that it is a very critical time and important moment for all of us to join hands when the governments are committing 15% for 15%. So I think it is the right time to collaborate and move forward towards promoting inclusive social protection for people with all disabilities. We will now give the floor to our next speaker, Ms. Marwa Mubarak from Humanity and Inclusion. Marwa has been working in the sector for more than a decade and is currently leading a deinstitutionalization project at Humanity and Inclusion. Through her work, she has been focusing on advancing inclusive projects, building capacities, and promoting equity and participation for all. Marwa Humanity and Inclusion is leading the a DI project in Jordan and also in partnership with Inclusion International. Can you share with us your lessons from the project in Jordan and how the project is supporting the transition of people with psychosocial disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities, and in general, all people with disabilities from institutional cares to community living, and how the access to social protection schemes have been after people have transitioned into the mainstream communities? Over to you, Marwa.
Thank you, Wakar, for the introduction. So I will go through quickly and sharing Jordan experience in implementing the deinstitutionalization strategy for persons with disabilities. So the national strategy for the deinstitutionalization of persons with disability released in 2019 by the Ministry of Social Development and the Higher Council of the Right of Persons with Disabilities. It showed the roadmap, how we can transfer the system of care to be like an inclusive within their communities and to be lived independently within their communities and within their families. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yes, next one. So the aim of the strategy is to end the institutions of people with disability in Jordan to ensure that the best interests of each person with disability are respected and to provide lasting and sustainable changes, as well as enable the eventual reintegration of people with disability into family-based surrounding and community-based environment, living as they should as part by the law, either the UN Survey law or the National Disability Law, and living independently. At the start of the strategy, there were, if we can go to the next slide, please. At the start of the strategy, there were around 34 residential institutions in Jordan. 5 of them are operated by the government, 27 of them are private sector, and 2 institutions managed by voluntary institutions. These residential institutions are hosted 1,471 residents from both males and females, with the majority being persons with intellectual disabilities. But what we found around 70% of the residents have associated psychosocial disabilities. And some of them are persons with psychosocial disorders or disability only, and they are being diagnosed as intellectual disability to be enrolled in these institutions, which is highlighting the complexity of their support and needed in these institutions. And the only thing that they are provided in these institutions are caring system, rather than they are providing rehabilitation and appropriate rehabilitation program for both intellectual disabilities and someone who has a mental health disorders. Next slide, please. So the disadvantage of the institutions that we are founded in general, and that's why the government, they are need to end these institutions. It's lead to restrictive environment, often result in prolonged isolation and exclusion, denying individual their basic rights and freedom. Some people, they are staying there from 5 years until 30 years or spend their whole life. We found that weaknesses of the relationship between the community and persons and even with the families. Families, after a long time, they are refused to rehost their children and they are not accepting them to come back to live with them. We found that the individual condition may worsen or become like more deteriorated over time within such residential institutions. As I said, they are giving like care, but not rehabilitation, a program for beneficiary, or even not empowering them or not empowering even the families. One of the big issues that we found is misdiagnosis between persons with psychosocial disorders and persons with intellectual disability. This even influenced by the family, request driven, due to the stigma that to have a person with psychosocial disability that they prefer to diagnose them as intellectual disability, to put them in this institution. And also some of them, we found it like is a protection cases from women, particularly survivors of gender-based violence and have a psychosocial disabilities, because the protection centers, they don't know how to deal with persons with psychosocial disabilities and provide a rehabilitation program. They diagnosed as intellectual disability and they are including them in these institutions. Also, we found that it creates an economic and social burden on the states at its cost to be in these institutions. It costs more than 1,000 euro per month for each beneficiary or each person. Next slide. So within our project in Jordan, as a humanitarian inclusion in partnership with Inclusion International, which is funded by the European Union, we supported the government to transfer one of the governmental institutions and centers into inclusive daily care facility. This center is hosting currently women with intellectual disability and women with mental health disorders. What we worked on during the process of the deinstitutionalization, we began by strengthening the capacity of the institutional staff who's working on these institutions to shift their mindset from being a caregiver to become supporter for persons with disability and for their families. We recreated a multidisciplinary team that conducted inclusive case management for persons and his family, and to go and support the persons and their family through their journey, and even during the institution or after being rehosted by their families. With Inclusion International, we worked in empowering the women in the center on self-advocacy and empowering them how to make choices and decisions about their own lives, what they want, where they want to live, what they want to eat, what they want to wear every day. During the program, because we are thinking that the most important is to enhance the community and the services on the ground. So we tried in the program to empower the OBDs to raise awareness sessions and advocacy about living independence. We trained them how they can participate in drafting the shadow reports and challenging the government in front of the UN, but also we trained them how they can create an inclusive support services and inclusive community services. Under this project, under this center only, we were able successfully to move out 12 women with disability and psychosocial disorders to be rehosted by either biological family or foster family. But also we worked with more than 500 individuals to prevent them from being instituted in the institutions who are registered at the ministry list to be included in these institutions. I know 12 women is a limited number, but it talks like a huge support, a huge effort to be able to move them by convincing the family, the community, and even working with them on to receive support from the social protection services. Next slide, please. Yes. Under the social protection, definitely we have lack of data related to persons with psychosocial disabilities. Currently, the government, they are working on disability cards, which are not yet linked with the national statistics system, and it's become mandatory to receive all the social protection services. For all persons with disability in Jordan, they have health insurance, but it's very limited in terms of the services. Example, they cannot cover the psychologist services or consultation or medications for persons with psychosocial disorders. Currently, newly, families, they start to receive financial assistance from the National Aid Fund or from the Ministry of Social Development on monthly basis for the rehosted, for the family who rehosted their families, but as a way to alternative to institutions and to support them to covering their disability-related cost. Also, we have currently, the government, they will apply by 2027, the personal assistance services to be able to help the families who has persons with intellectual disabilities, but as well who has psychosocial disorders. The beneficiary who moved out or the person who moved out from these institutions, they're supposed to be enrolled in inclusive daily care centers, which is provided early intervention services for children, including rehabilitation services, vocational training, and psychosocial support for the families and for persons with disabilities. We found one of the gaps that these centers, they are providing only services for children with mild disabilities and who are being independent in their daily activities. So we found the gaps that the staff, they are not capacitated, and the center, they are not equipped to provide services for adults with disabilities and who has a psychosocial disabilities. So in Jordan, we have at least, should be all the based on the labor law, includes disability quota, including that at least 4% of the employees should be persons with disability, but efforts it's need to be made to reach this point. The last slide is talking about our observation and needs to implement the DI strategy properly. If we can go to the next slide. So after piloting this project, we found that there are need of prioritize enhancing the strengthening the community system and services. including expanding accesses to inclusive daily care centers, increasing the staff capacities to support individuals with severe disabilities, and empowering OBDs and CBO to establish inclusive services and respite care services. Also, we need to make an effort to promote family and community acceptance to rehost families members with disability, as a stigma surrounding mental health condition and intellectual disability remaining prevalent. Establishing multi-ministerial coordination to ensure that individuals receive appropriate services and support before transition out of the centers. This coordination will help align resources across all the sectors to be able to cover the needs of persons with disabilities and have access to all the sectors. So this is briefly within done in deinstitutionalization in Jordan in general. So thank you.
Thank you, Marwa, for your presentation, and thank you for highlighting again the issue of lack of data of persons with psychosocial disabilities and the current tools being used for the data collection, household surveys, or population census does not include people with psychosocial disabilities. And also, as Daniel mentioned in the chat, thank you so much, Daniel, for mentioning that point that and supporting TCI to connect with the Washington group and how we can work together and bring the extended version, which includes and can support best possible way to all governments to include the data of persons with psychosocial disabilities. And also you highlighted the point of disability certificates. Yes, it is very complicated, and that many persons with disabilities are unable to even complete that disability assessment processes. As we are moving towards the end of the webinar, I will just rush a little bit because it's we are almost like out of the time. And we have, as listened to the challenges and barriers, we have heard many good practices and also recommendations that what needs to be done from to be done for to and what should be supported from our governments or technical agencies, OPDs, INGOs, and government agencies. We will now move to the next speaker, and we will explore what are several opportunities available for our movements and OPDs to advance inclusive data and social protection systems at all levels, including national, regional, and global levels. So I will quickly request Samuel from CICK to take the floor. Samuel is the founding director of Championing for Inclusive Communities in Kenya. His core work involves advocating for independent living and being included in the community, in line with the provisions of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities and the Sustainable Development Goals. Samuel is also representing at the board of TCI. Samuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Wakar, and all the others who have been presenting. I'll be very brief because most of what I would have said has already been captured by the speakers of today. I'm sorry for the background noise. There is some mourning going on from one of the departed opposition leaders, and it is impossible to pass from one corner of the town to the other. First, I would think that the greatest opportunity for persons with psychosocial disabilities is the promotion of or advancing for inclusive social protection for persons with psychosocial disabilities. Because you realize that persons with psychosocial disabilities are excluded among the disability movements. Because like now in Kenya, we have a very strong movement for persons with visual impairments, persons with albinism, persons with physical disabilities, and other disabilities that can be seen. But persons with invisible disabilities get excluded, and therefore they are excluded in most of the policy formulation processes. So as an OPD, we need to be there promoting the policy framework and inclusion of OPDs in every step. That is policy formulation as well as implementation for inclusive social protection for persons with psychosocial disabilities. The second one is coalition and partnership building. And this is a very good example is where we had a joint training under the United Disabled Persons in Kenya, with and CIP, Center for Inclusive Policies. They trained us on budget actualization and inclusive budget actualization. And we were able to analyze budgets for 4 counties. And we could tell that there was very minimal inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities with these budgets. And there is also a very big challenge from the medical movement, whereby psychosocial disability is perceived from the medical model. And therefore, the perception is that persons with psychosocial disabilities can only be considered when they have been enshrined in institutions, which is against the policy of the CRPD, whereby people must be given reasonable accommodations and full participation within the communities of their choice. So inclusive social protection means that supports and accommodations are offered within the communities and where people work. And an inclusive social protection framework must look at the cost of the disability cost for persons with psychosocial disabilities, as well as the cost of having a support person. In most cases, you find that even the support person may be denied their full-time work to support this person for them to live a productive livelihoods. Therefore, the government needs to put into place mechanisms whereby there are concessions for persons who support persons with psychosocial disabilities. And TCI has got the opportunity now to liaise with donors to mobilize for funds for persons with, for OPDs, national movements in the state parties, and where there is membership of TCI to build national movements who can fully engage the stakeholders in policy and legal frameworks for inclusive budget processes. And also the donor community needs to come on board because lack of donor funding also has led to lack of full and effective participation of persons with psychosocial disabilities in capacity building for the stakeholders. For instance, we need to do a lot of sensitization in the media. We need also to sensitize the stakeholders through capacity building workshops. We also need to do a lot of trainings on inclusive budgeting. We also need to do a lot of sensitization on disability costs and also on the public to understand the implications of psychosocial disabilities in the lives of persons with psychosocial disabilities. And I think that because of the much time and much has been said, I don't have much to add, but hand back to Wakar to summarize this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you for your remarks and sharing with us that how we need to focus on and what is already available as opportunities to all OPDs at the national level as well as at the regional level and at the global level for which can support and promote inclusion of people with psychosocial disabilities in the social protection programs. And also shared, and you shared about the initiative which already have been taken by TCI or CIP or other organizations. UNICEF has done a lot, ILO has done a lot. There is Social Protection Org which is doing a lot. So how we can bring all of these efforts together to collectively work together in collaboration as well as in and as well as try to promote and include voices of all kinds of people with disabilities so that nobody is left behind. And in TCI, we have been doing a lot of technical capacity building as our strategy is to build national movements. We will continue to do that and we will continue to organize and facilitate support and technical capacity building of OPDs at the grassroots community levels. We will now move towards the end of the webinar, and I will give floor again back to Daniel Mont. Daniel, we are closing the webinar, and we have been hearing several strategies and inclusion practices. And as Kavita was mentioning in TCI networks also, like there are several models which are actually doing this grassroots work on community supports and community inclusion. We also received suggestions from different members and speakers. What are some of the recommendations you would like to share with us as role of technical agencies to ensure that social protection systems can be more inclusive of people with disabilities? I will give the floor to you and will hand over then to Richa. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think the main thing that technical agencies can do in support of trying to make policies more inclusive is by providing information and analysis and evidence that advocates and policymakers can use. And I think it's important that that data that a number of people have talked about fulfills several different purposes. And the type of data you need for each of those purposes is different. And it's important to be able to align the data that you're collecting and the mechanisms you're using to collect that data with those purposes. So I'll go through each of the four purposes, and they are identifying where action is needed, so determining then what actions we want to take to address the problems that we document, and then to monitor, to track how well those actions are actually being implemented. It's one thing to say you're going to have a program, it's another to actually make it real in the world. And finally, to evaluate the impact of those actions, because we want to be able to identify good practices, best practices. Sometimes the things we think are going to work don't, and we need to understand why so we can make them better. Next slide. So identifying where action is needed. Here, what we really need to do is support the capacity of national systems to collect good quality data and to collect appropriate indicators that truly do capture the experience of people with disabilities. And quite often, people jump to talking about prevalence. But prevalence is only the very beginning of the first step. What we really need to be able to document are those outcome gaps between persons with and without disabilities, and to take into account intersectionalities with gender or ethnicity or different types of disability, to really get a situational analysis, a picture of what are the situations and conditions we are confronting, and to document those. Next slide. Once we do that, that's only the first step. Then we have to determine what actions can we take that will rectify that exclusion and those injustices. And here we need to support the collection analysis of data, quantitative data on the environment, on the support needs, on barriers that people face. This is an area where data collection is too sparse. There's a lot of effort on that first purpose I mentioned. There's not nearly enough effort on this second. So to measure, for example, what are the extra costs of disability that we've been talking about? Can we, what are they exactly? And identifying what are the main reasons for the disability gap in employment. It's one thing to say there's a gap. It's another thing to understand what are the key reasons that might lead to the policy levers that we can use to reduce those gaps. And also to get qualitative data that can provide more textured and nuanced information about how disability interacts with the environment. For example, understanding the family dynamics that underlie household decisions, so we can understand those processes and try to figure out how we can support mechanisms to make them better. The next slide. Once we determine what actions are needed, then we want to be able to monitor, to track how those actions are implemented. And here we want to have budget analysis. We want to be able to look at government budgets, see how much money is being spent on disability-related items, and how is it being spent? Is it being spent in accordance with the CRPD? Is money that is allocated actually distributed? And we want to be able to help build up administrative tools for collecting data on the environment, If we are going to say, for example, that we're going to institute accessibility in public schools, we need to be able to monitor whether those actions are being taken in all those schools, and that could be done through administrative data, social welfare data, housing data, and the like. Next slide. And then we want to be able to evaluate those actions, right? We've decided that we want to have circles of support for supported decision making, and we wanted, we've decided that that's a key barrier to the lives of people with disabilities, not having that kind of support. We've identified that. We set up the program. We monitor it to make sure it's actually happening. And then the next thing we want to do is evaluate it and see if it's how much of a difference is it making in people's lives. To do that well, we need to think about it right from the beginning of the program. Quite often I see people have a program, then they come and they say, let's evaluate it. Usually then it's too late to do a good evaluation. The evaluation has to be built in from the beginning. We have to have a baseline. What's the situation before the program? We have to make sure we're having an appropriate indicator. If autonomy is something that we think is very important for the lives of people with disabilities, we have to be able to construct an indicator which we think accurately captures what we mean by autonomy in a way that the data can be collected in a quality way. And then we have to have well-constructed comparison or control groups, right? To see if a program is effective, you have to compare it against something else. So we have to set up our program in a way where we can do that. And if we do, we can then show the cost effectiveness. We can show the benefit of these programs and more successfully advocate for them to be scaled up. Next slide. So what can the technical agencies do? They can help in the design of appropriate tools and methodologies. Like, for example, improving the assessment tools that ministries of social welfare use to try to identify what are the support needs of people with disabilities. Advocate for data systems so that the surveys, the censuses, the administrative data, the citizen-generated data are coordinated and harmonized so we have a really full picture of the situation. And I could talk about data systems a lot more, but I probably only have about 30 seconds, so I'll leave it there. And then finally, analysis. Not just doing a new analysis to answer some of the questions I was just talking about, but also to critique others' analysis from that don't approach disability from a CRPD perspective in order to be able to be able to consume and respond to other research. And it's always important in all of these things to be working in conjunction with OPDs, because if you want to get a good indicator, you have to understand what it means to be living with a disability, and only people with disabilities really understand that. If the data is going to be collected in a sensitive way, again, it has to come from OPDs. If we're going to collect data on what are the barriers to participation, well, who better understands what the barriers to participation are than people with disabilities? So they need to be a full participant in the all aspects of collecting, analyzing, and disseminating data. I think that's my last slide. So thank you. And I'm happy to talk with anybody about research or data analysis of any kind in support of inclusive policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much for clearly, I think there was a lot of discussion around what data assessment tools really miss. But I think your last presentation addresses many of those issues that were discussed today. So thank you for that. So I know I'll start by really thanking you all. We know that we are well beyond our time, but thank you so much for staying with us. And we will be now just making very brief closing remarks before we officially close the session. So today's discussion has been deeply, deeply enriching and insightful, and we really thank all the panelists for your contributions. We began the session with a solid grounding of what is actually meant by social protection mechanisms and why they're needed for persons with disabilities. And there was such an interesting take on how even well-intentioned social protection mechanisms also fail to take into consideration the extra costs incurred by persons with disabilities. We then were looking at barriers that persons with psychosocial disabilities face when accessing these schemes. For all of us, for everyone, sense of self starts with identity. And we face challenges even with getting our identity accepted as part of the disability movement and even within our communities. We also heard about importance of using the intersectional lens and how often we are forced into choosing one identity over the other. We also heard about legal barriers or legal shackling, what was also called the civil death, which through discriminatory and stigmatizing laws that formally codified taking away rights and decision-making authority of persons with psychosocial disabilities as well as intellectual disabilities. There were multiple points that emphasized that we are still being missed in data assessment systems and how we have to perform brokenness to access these schemes to fit into the definitions and criteria of impairments, impairment-based definitions. But we were not only hearing about barriers and challenges throughout this session, we were also hearing about solutions and good practices. How goals of awareness needs to change from how can we treat this person to who are we leaving behind and how can we support this person. We heard from very rich examples from the ground on how significant our community support systems that act as the soft infrastructure that makes formal social protection work in real life. We also heard about direct experiences of navigating roles as a person with psychosocial disability, representing this voice in different forums, which often truly comes at the cost of invisible emotional labor or funding constraints, but then how important it is to also develop a cohesive ecosystem within our movement, in addition to partnering with other stakeholders. How Inclusion International shared that we share these experiences of exclusion and segregation. And with cross-disability movements, how a unified approach to think together of solution could be the way to address the adage of how one size does not fit all. We heard some heartening news from Jordan, where there is a deinstitutionalization strategy in place already, which it also, the presentation also reiterated and reaffirmed the disadvantages of institutions in any form or shape for our constituency. And it also very richly spoke of prevention of institutionalization by responding to the needs of persons with disabilities. We look forward to exchanging these learnings between our members and who do similar work in their communities. And towards the end, we also want to share that this webinar for us is not just a one-time event. We see it as a stepping stone. We see it as the beginning of a collective effort to build something which is meaningful and something that responds to the concerns we heard today. While also carrying forward the positive examples that were shared. We'll be working closely with our partners who very kindly partnered with us on this webinar to strategize and co-develop practical and truly inclusive solutions together. We will be sharing updates on the same via our social media platforms. And if any of you are interested in connecting with us, please feel free to send an email to the ID, which will be just shared in a while by my colleague in the chat box. Before we close, I'm very excited to share a special announcement. And Bhagya, can I please request you to just share your screen and show us the poster, please? Thank you. Thank you, Bhagya. So like I said, very excited to share a special announcement. We are launching the What We Need 2025 campaign, as has been our tradition for the last 8 years. This campaign began in 2018. We launched it on 10th of October as a way of challenging and correcting the medical oppression that has long shaped our lives and shaped our movement. Since 2018, What We Need has grown into a vibrant, powerful, and a very creative global campaign, one that is hard-hitting, one that is truth-telling, is emotional, and deeply personal to our community. The 2025 campaign, as you see in the poster that we have shared, will run till the 22nd of December this year, and we invite contributions from all of you. We are very open and flexible in terms of formats, so you can share blogs, poetry, artwork, creative pieces, videos, pictures, whatever suits, whatever works for you. You can find all the details in the poster, and in the chat box, Fiza, my colleague, is also putting in the website link to our campaign page to, if you want to see the archives of our previous years. And we invite you all to make your submissions, and would love to see your voices, your creativity, and your stories reflected in this year's campaign. With that, on behalf of TCI, I want to thank each one of you, all our panelists, all our support persons, and everyone who joined us today. We had such a wonderful response to this webinar in terms of registrations, and it was heartening to see so many of you here with us today. Thank you once again to everyone for being part of today's powerful conversation. We truly value your time, your insights, and your solidarity. Take care and have a good day and good evening wherever you're joining us from. With that, we officially close the webinar. Thank you.